The business card hit the pavement before the laugh did. Lawson Creed leaned out of the passenger window of his armored SUV. Black, brushed matte, the kind of vehicle that made other drivers change lanes, and flicked the card at the woman standing on the corner of 9th and Desiree. It spun once in the cold air and landed face down in a puddle at her feet. "Even a graveyard needs someone to sweep the floors," he said. He didn't wait for her answer. He didn't need one. Bridget Knox laughed from the back seat, a sound like champagne fizz, and Lawson rolled the window up. The SUV pulled away from the curb and swallowed the distance between them in seconds. What he saw, standing in that dusty coat under a broken streetlight, was a woman he had already finished with. A relic, a receipt he'd already discarded. What he didn't see, what no one in his life would ever think to look for, was the architect of his destruction. 3 weeks before that encounter, the envelope had arrived. Not at Lawson's office. Not at the law firm. At a small, third-floor walk-up on Elmore Street. In a building where the hallway radiators clanked like loose pipes and the mailboxes hadn't been repainted since the previous decade. It was tucked between a utility bill and a grocery circular, and it bore no return address, just the seal of the U.S. District Court, Eastern Division, pressed into heavy cream paper. Mina Creed picked it up on a Tuesday. She turned it over once in her hands. She did not open it immediately. Instead, she set it on the small kitchen table next to her coffee. Black, no sugar, the same way she'd been drinking it for 3 years, and sat with it for exactly 12 minutes. The apartment was quiet in the way that small, solitary spaces are quiet. Not peaceful, just empty. A single window looked out over a concrete alley where pigeons moved in slow, indifferent circles. When she finally opened the envelope, her hands did not shake. The letter inside was 3 paragraphs. The language was dense, formal, the kind of prose that was designed to intimidate. But Mina had spent the last 3 years learning to read exactly this kind of language. She had spent more nights than she could count bent over patent filings and court precedents at the public library on Hargrove Avenue. Because the apartment had no internet. Not because she couldn't afford it, but because she couldn't afford to leave a digital trail. She read the letter. She folded it. She placed it back in the envelope. Then she finished her coffee. The thing about Lawson Creed was that he understood power the way a bull understands a china shop. Entirely through force, entirely through motion, and entirely without regard for what broke. He had built Creed Logistics from a regional courier outfit into the fastest automated freight network in the Eastern Corridor in under 6 years. Drones, trucks, routing algorithms that could reroute a shipment mid-flight to beat a competitor by 11 minutes. The numbers were staggering. The magazine covers were frequent. And Lawson wore all of it the way he wore his suits. Loud, tailored, impossible to ignore. Bridget Knox had entered his life at the exact moment the empire needed a face that matched its ambition. She was younger by 15 years, sharper in the way that mattered to men like Lawson. Photogenic, quick with a laugh, uninterested in the details of how the money was made, only in how it looked on a table. She wore red the way other women wore armor. It was her signature, her punctuation, the color that told a room she had already decided who mattered in it. Lawson loved her the way a man loves a mirror that only shows him his best angle. And Mina was the mirror he had thrown out. They had been married for 15 years before the divorce. 15 years in which Mina had managed his books, smoothed his edges, and quietly, invisibly, made the kind of contributions that no one photographs for a magazine cover. When Lawson decided she was no longer useful, when Bridget walked into a charity gala in a red dress and Lawson looked at her the way a man looked at a door he didn't know was there, the divorce was swift, surgical, and designed to leave nothing. Except it left one thing. In the final hearing, Lawson's lawyers had pushed a settlement structure that looked, on paper, like generosity. No alimony, no cash. Instead, Mina would receive full ownership of Creed Legacy Holdings, a shell company Lawson had inherited from his grandfather and never once looked at. It contained a portfolio of patents so old, so dormant, that Lawson's own legal team had flagged them as commercially dead. The company had filed no revenue in 11 years. Its offices hadn't existed since the previous decade. It was, in every visible sense, worth nothing. Lawson had laughed when he signed the paperwork. "I'm giving you a graveyard," he told her. Across the mahogany table in the conference room, Bridget was beside him, legs crossed, a champagne flute held loosely at her hip. "But hey, at least it's yours." Mina had said nothing. She had taken the documents. She had walked out of the room without looking back. Not because she was broken, but because she had already begun to read. That was 3 years ago. Now, in the small apartment on Elmore Street, Mina set the court envelope in a manila folder and placed it in a locked drawer, the only locked thing in the apartment. The drawer was full. Every document inside it had been placed there with the same quiet precision, the same economy of movement, the same refusal to rush. She stood at the window for a moment. The alley below was gray and unremarkable. A man walked a dog. A delivery truck idled at the curb. Nothing about the scene would make anyone look twice at the woman watching it. That was the point. Lawson Creed measured the world by what it showed him. Mina had learned, in the hardest way a person learns anything, that the most dangerous things in the world are the ones that refuse to be seen. She had 4 months until the merger. She intended to use every one of them. The family court on Millbrook Street smelled like old wood and recycled air. Mina sat on one side of the table. Lawson sat on the other. Between them, a landscape of manila folders, legal pads, and the kind of silence that only exists when two people have already decided they are done pretending. Lawson's lawyers were a wall of tailored navy. 3 of them, each one sharp-eyed, each one expensive. Mina's attorney, a single woman named Diane Marsh, gray-haired and unflinching, who charged by the hour and didn't waste a single one, sat to her left with a single folder open on the table. Bridget Knox was not in the courtroom. She was waiting in the car. Lawson had told Mina this without being asked, the way you drop a piece of information designed to land like a slap. Mina had received it without expression. The settlement was presented at 10:47 in the morning. No alimony, no lump sum, no division of the current assets. Instead, Mina would receive Creed Legacy Holdings, a company that, according to the financial summary Lawson's team slid across the table, had generated 0 revenue in the last 11 years and held a portfolio of patents that had not been commercially exercised since before the smartphone existed. "It's a gesture of generosity," said the lead attorney, a man with silver temples and a voice like polished granite. "Mrs. Creed receives a fully formed corporate entity with intellectual property." Diane Marsh looked at the summary. She looked at Mina. Something passed between them, not surprise, not quite, but a flicker of something that Mina would later recognize as the first thread of a plan being pulled. "My client will review the documents," Diane said. Lawson leaned back in his chair. He was a big man, broad across the shoulders, tattooed from his jaw to his knuckles in patterns that had once marked him as something dangerous and now simply marked him as something conspicuous. He wore a dark suit with a charcoal tie, and his teeth showed when he smiled. "Mina," he said. The use of her first name was deliberate, the way a man uses a word he knows will sting. "You're getting a company, a real company, with a name and a history and patents and everything." He spread his hands, palms up, the universal gesture of someone offering you something they know is worthless. "What more do you want?" Mina looked at him. She had spent 15 years learning every frequency of his voice, the one that charmed, the one that threatened, the one that laughed at its own cruelty as though cruelty were a form of wit. She knew this one. It was the voice that had told her, on their 3rd anniversary, that she was the most boring person he had ever loved. She had believed him then. She didn't believe him now. "I'll take it," she said. Lawson's smile widened. He signed. She signed. The papers were gathered, dated, and filed. 40 minutes later, Mina walked out of the courthouse into a gray afternoon. Diane Marsh walked beside her, clutching a copy of the settlement documents against her chest like a shield. "You know what's in that company," Diane said. It wasn't a question. Mina didn't answer. She just looked at the parking lot where Lawson's SUV was pulling away. Black, brushed matte, Bridget's red sleeve visible through the tinted window like a flag planted in conquered territory. She watched it until it turned the corner. Then she walked to the bus stop and sat down on the bench and waited. The boxes arrived on a Thursday. 17 of them, stacked in the hallway of the Elmore Street apartment in cardboard towers that reached past Mina's shoulders. Each one was labeled in faded marker. Legacy, patents. Legacy correspondence. Legacy archive. The labels were old. Some of the tape had gone brittle at the edges. Lawson had shipped them to her address without ceremony. The way you ship someone their clothes from a shared apartment after a breakup. Not with malice, exactly, but with the absolute certainty that you are done carrying them. Mina spent the first weekend sorting. She didn't start with the patents. She started with the correspondence, letters, memos, internal reports from the 1990s and early 2000s, written by men whose names she didn't recognize, about technologies she only half understood. The language was technical, dense, and frustrating. She read slowly. She took notes in a composition book with a ballpoint pen, the way students did before everything went digital. She made no assumptions. She simply absorbed. On the third day, she found it. It was buried in a folder labeled Routing Protocols. Draft submissions. Dated 11 years ago. Patent application. Not filed. Not activated. But written in full with technical specifications that ran to 47 pages. The title was dry, bureaucratic, forgettable. Standard Essential Patent Number 4471, R. Automated Multinode Routing Architecture for Freight Logistics Systems. Mina read it once. Then she read it again. Then she opened her laptop, the one she used for nothing but offline research, disconnected from any cloud, any account, any network, and she pulled up the public filings for Creed Logistics. Took her 2 hours to find what she was looking for. The routing algorithm that powered Lawson's drone fleet. The system that allowed his trucks to reroute in real time, to beat competitors by minutes, to move freight across the Eastern Corridor faster than anyone else in the country. The thing that made Creed Logistics not just successful, but untouchable. It was built on the same architecture as Patent 4471R. Not similar. Not inspired by. The same. Mina closed the laptop. She sat in the silence of the apartment for a long time, listening to the radiator clank and the pigeons move on the ledge outside. The composition book was open on the table beside her. The patent application was face down on top of it. She picked up her phone and dialed the only number she had saved in it besides the grocery store. "Diane," she said, "I need you to find me a patent attorney. Not a big firm. Someone small. Someone who understands standard essential patents and doesn't talk to anyone they don't have to." There was a pause on the other end. "Mina, what did you find?" "The mine," Mina said. "I found the mine." Time moved differently for the two of them. For Lawson, it moved fast, the way it moves for people who are building things, acquiring things, being photographed in the middle of things. Creed Logistics expanded west, then south, then overseas. The drones multiplied. The trucks bore his name on their sides in clean white letters, and those letters appeared on highways from Virginia to Georgia. A quiet declaration of dominance that anyone with eyes could read. He appeared on the cover of Supply Chain Quarterly in the spring. He appeared at a tech summit in Austin in the fall, standing on a stage with a blue light behind him, talking about the future of freight to an audience of 800 people who had paid $400 each to hear him. Bridget was always beside him, always in red, always laughing at the right moment, always positioned so the cameras caught her profile against his shoulder. Lawson Creed was a man who had built a kingdom in plain sight, and he enjoyed every single second of being seen. For Mina, time moved like water through sand, slow, invisible, and relentless. She hired the patent attorney Diane had found, a quiet man named Gerald Holt, who worked out of a two-room office above a dry cleaner's in Alexandria and who had spent 20 years specializing in exactly the kind of intellectual property disputes that most firms considered too small, too complex, or too risky to touch. He was the right size for the job. He was also, crucially, someone no one in Lawson's orbit would ever think to look for. The first meeting lasted 3 hours. Mina brought the patent application, the composition book full of notes, and a printed comparison she had built herself, page by page, line by line, showing where Creed Logistics' routing system matched the architecture in Patent 4471R. Gerald read it in silence. He did not interrupt. When he finished, he looked at her over the top of his glasses and said, simply, "This is airtight." "It needs to be more than airtight," Mina said. "It needs to be unarguable." And so they built the case, quietly, methodically, the way you build a structure in a room no one is watching. Every quarter, Mina documented another layer of Lawson's infringement. Every month, Gerald filed another quiet motion, another piece of evidence, another thread in a web that was invisible from the outside but was, from the inside, becoming unbreakable. Mina lived on almost nothing during those years. The apartment on Elmore Street cost $420 a month. She ate rice and vegetables. She drank black coffee. She owned 3 sets of clothes, all dark, all practical. None of them the kind of thing that would make someone look at her twice on the street. Every spare dollar, every single one, went into legal fees and court filings. She did not tell anyone what she was doing. Not friends, not family, not a single person who might have, in passing, mentioned it to someone who might have mentioned it to someone who worked for Lawson Creed. She understood, with a clarity that had taken her years to develop, that the moment Lawson knew what she was building, he would use every resource at his disposal to bury it. So she waited. She waited while the case files grew thicker. She waited while the infringement deepened. Each new contract Lawson signed, each new route his drones flew, was another brick in the wall of evidence. She waited while Gerald moved through the courts with the patience of a man who understood that some cases were not won in months but in years. She waited because she understood something that Lawson, for all his speed and force and noise, had never learned. The most dangerous move in any game is the one your opponent doesn't know you're making. The penthouse overlooked the city the way a throne overlooks a courtyard. Lawson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of bourbon in one hand, the city glittering below him in a sprawl of light that he had, in some measurable sense, helped to build. The towers of Creed Logistics' new headquarters rose 3 blocks to the east, glass and steel, and his name on the side in letters that could be read from the highway. Bridget was on the sofa behind him, her legs tucked beneath her, scrolling through her phone with the idle concentration of someone who had stopped being impressed by the view months ago. She wore red, as always, a silk blouse, open at the collar, the color catching the ambient light from the city below. "The merger is in 4 months, Lawson said, without turning around. "I know," Bridget said. "Hargrove Global. $12 billion in combined assets." He said the number the way other men said the names of their children, with pride, with possessiveness, with the quiet assumption that it belonged to him. "Once it's done, we'll be the largest automated freight network on the continent. Not just the Eastern Corridor. The continent." "And then what?" Lawson smiled. It was the smile he wore in interviews, wide, easy, the kind of smile that made people feel like they were in on a joke. "Then we do it again." He turned from the window and walked to the bar. He poured another bourbon. The apartment was large, immaculate, decorated in the palette of wealth. Dark wood, leather, a single abstract painting on one wall that had cost more than most people's cars. "You know what the nerds don't understand?" he said, settling into the chair across from Bridget. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the way he did when he was about to explain something he considered fundamental. "They think the business is in the code, in the algorithms, in the routing systems and the software architecture and all the little invisible things that make the drones go where they're supposed to go." Bridget looked up from her phone. She knew this speech. She had heard versions of it a dozen times. But she listened anyway because listening was what she did, and because Lawson's face, when he was explaining his philosophy of the world, was the closest it ever came to something that resembled sincerity. "The business is in the trucks," Lawson said. "The drones, the warehouses, the contracts, the speed. You can write the best algorithm in the world, But if you don't have the muscle to move the freight, the algorithm is a poem nobody reads. He took a sip of his bourbon. I built this with force, with speed, with the willingness to do what other companies were too scared to do. That's it. That's the whole secret. He leaned back, satisfied with himself in the deep, uncomplicated way that men like Lawson are satisfied. Not because they have examined the foundations of their success, but because they have never needed to. The legal teams, the patent people, the compliance guys, they're there because someone has to be, he said. But they're not the reason we win. We win because I am faster, louder, and meaner than anyone else in the room. Bridget smiled. It was a real smile, or close enough. She liked Lawson best when he was like this, confident, expansive, filling up the space around him with the sheer force of his certainty. Neither of them thought about the woman in the small apartment on Elmore Street, bent over a composition book, building something invisible. Neither of them had any reason to. The encounter happened on a Tuesday, in the gray part of the afternoon when the light had gone flat and the streets had emptied out the way they do in parts of a city that tourism brochures don't mention. Lawson was in the back of the SUV. Bridget was beside him, dressed in red as always, her phone open to a real estate listing. They were looking at properties in the Harbor District, the kind of places that had doormen and concierge services and rooftop gardens. The driver was taking a shortcut through the Desiree Corridor, a stretch of road that ran along the old rail yards, because traffic on the main avenue had backed up behind a construction crew. Lawson saw her before Bridget did. She was standing on the corner of 9th and Desiree, waiting for the bus. A dusty coat, dark and shapeless, the kind of coat that made a person disappear into the background of a city. Her hair was pulled back. Her hands were in her pockets. She was looking at something on the ground. Not her phone, Lawson registered, because the phone she had used to be married to him had been a sleek, expensive thing, and this woman didn't look like someone who owned one anymore. "Stop the car," Lawson said. The driver pulled to the curb. Lawson rolled down the window. The air that came in was cold, tinged with diesel and something metallic from the rail yards. Mina looked up. Their eyes met. There was a beat of silence, the kind that happens between two people who share a history that neither of them has fully processed. Lawson's expression was the one Bridget knew well, the slow, spreading amusement of a man who has just spotted something he can use. "Mina," he said. Her name sounded different in his mouth now. Not like something he owned, but like something he had already thrown away. She didn't answer. She stood very still, the way animals stand still when they are deciding whether to run or wait. Lawson reached into his jacket and pulled out one of his business cards. Matt Black, his name embossed in gold, the logo of Creed Logistics in the corner. He held it out the window between two fingers, the way a man offers a tip to someone he considers beneath him. "Even a graveyard needs someone to sweep the floors," he said. The card fell. It hit the pavement and skidded into a puddle at Mina's feet, face down, the gold lettering darkening with water. Bridget leaned forward to see what was happening. Her expression was curious, slightly uncomfortable. She had heard Lawson talk about his ex-wife before, always with the same dismissive wave, the same phrase. She got nothing because she was worth nothing. But seeing the woman in person, standing on a street corner in a coat that looked like it had been washed too many times, made the cruelty of it feel less abstract. "Lawson," Bridget said quietly. He ignored her. He was watching Mina's face. Mina looked down at the card in the puddle. Then she looked back up at Lawson. Her expression did not change. It did not crumble, did not flash with anger, did not do any of the things that Lawson's cruelty was designed to provoke. She simply looked at him, steadily, calmly, with the kind of patience that belongs to people who have already won and are simply waiting for the world to catch up. "Thank you," she said. The words landed strangely. Lawson's smile flickered. Not much, just a fraction. The way a flame flickers when a draft moves through a room. He hadn't expected them. He had expected tears, or rage, or the silence of defeat. He had not expected gratitude. "Roll it up," he said to the driver, and the window closed. The SUV pulled away. Lawson settled back into his seat and picked up his phone, already thinking about something else. The encounter was, to him, a small pleasure, the kind of casual cruelty that required no effort and left no mark on his conscience, because he had long since stopped believing that the people he discarded had consciences of their own. On the corner of 9th and Desiree, Mina watched the SUV disappear around the bend. Then she picked up the business card. She dried it carefully on the inside of her coat. She slipped it into her pocket, not out of sentiment but out of habit. Everything went into the file. Everything was evidence. She went back to waiting for the bus. She had 3 months and 12 days until the merger. The clock, as it always had, was running in her favor. The lobby of Creed Logistics headquarters was designed to make people feel small. 40 feet of polished marble floor. Ceilings that disappeared into architectural shadow. A reception desk carved from a single block of black stone, behind which 2 women in matching charcoal uniforms waited with the kind of practiced neutrality that expensive buildings train into their staff. On the wall above them, in letters 3 feet tall, Creed Logistics. Below it, in smaller type, Moving the Future. The day of the merger signing, the lobby had been transformed. Cameras, press, a long table draped in white, positioned at the center of the space like an altar, where the representatives of Hargrove Global and the leadership of Creed Logistics would sit, sign, and be photographed. Champagne glasses were already arranged on a secondary table, hundreds of them, gleaming in the overhead light, waiting to be filled. Lawson arrived at 9:15 in the morning, 15 minutes early, which was unusual for him. He wore a suit that had been tailored in Milan black architectural, the kind of suit that made a man look like he had been designed rather than dressed. His tattoos were visible above the collar, the geometric patterns running up the side of his neck in a way that had once marked him as dangerous and now simply marked him as someone who wanted you to know he had once been dangerous. Bridget was at his side, in red. A dress this time, fitted, floor-length, the color of a stopped heart. She held a champagne flute in one hand and touched Lawson's arm with the other, and the cameras loved it. They loved her. She was, in the language of these events, a narrative, the beautiful woman beside the powerful man, the confirmation that power and desire lived in the same room. Lawson looked around the lobby, his building, his name on the wall. In 4 hours, his name would be on something bigger, a combined entity worth $12 billion, the kind of number that newspapers put in headlines and boards of directors whispered about in rooms with no cameras. He felt, in that moment, untouchable. The Hargrove delegation arrived at 9:30. 6 people in expensive suits, led by a woman named Patricia Hargrove herself. Silver-haired, sharp-eyed, the kind of businesswoman who had built her empire without ever raising her voice above a conversational register. She shook Lawson's hand with a grip that surprised him. It was firmer than he expected. "Shall we begin?" she said. The signing was scheduled for noon. The morning passed in the way these mornings pass. Introductions, pleasantries, the careful choreography of 2 organizations that were about to become one, pretending, for the cameras, that they had always been friends. Lawson played his part well. He was charming in the way that men who have spent years being watched learn to be charming. Effortlessly, mechanically, with just enough warmth to feel genuine. At 11:45, the legal teams began assembling the final documents at the signing table. Lawson's lead attorney, the silver-templed man from the divorce hearing, whose name was Richard Garland, arranged the papers with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. Each document was flagged, tabbed, and positioned exactly where it needed to be. Bridget excused herself to use the restroom. Lawson barely noticed. He was watching the cameras, making sure the angle was right, making sure the moment, when it came, would look exactly the way he wanted it to look in the morning papers. At 11:52, Garland leaned close to Lawson's ear. "We're ready," he said. "Patricia signs first, then you. The champagne toast goes up immediately after." Lawson nodded. He straightened his tie. He smiled. Somewhere, in a courthouse 3 miles from this lobby, Mina, Creed's attorney, had filed the last document in a case that had been building quietly for 3 years. The clock was at 11:55. The doors opened at 11:58. Not the front doors, those were glass, and the lobby staff had eyes on them all morning. These were the side doors, the ones that led to the service corridor, the ones that no one in the room had thought to watch because no one in the room had imagined that what was about to happen could come through a side door. For people entered. 3 men and 1 woman, all in dark suits, all wearing the kind of expressions that belong to people who have done this before and know exactly how it is going to feel for the people in the room. The woman carried a leather portfolio. One of the men carried a manila envelope, sealed, with the seal of the U.S. District Court pressed into the flap. The lobby went silent. It didn't happen all at once. It happened the way silence spreads in a large room, starting at the center, where the newcomers had entered, and moving outward in concentric rings, like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. First the staff at the reception desk. Then the press who turned their cameras. The woman with the portfolio stepped forward. She stopped 6 feet from the signing table, positioned herself so that every camera in the room could see her face, and spoke clearly enough that the microphones picked it up without effort. Mr. Creed, my name is Agent Teresa Voss. I am here on behalf of the U.S. District Court, Eastern Division, to serve a permanent injunction and asset seizure order in the matter of Creed Legacy Holdings versus Creed Logistics Incorporated. She opened the portfolio. She placed a single document on the signing table, not beside the merger paperwork, but directly on top of it, centered, deliberate, the way a card is placed on a table to end a hand of poker. The room held its breath. Lawson stared at the document. His face did not change. Not yet. The smile was still there, the one from the cameras, the one that said he was in control of every room he entered. But something behind it had shifted. Something in the architecture of his expression had begun, very quietly, to crack. "What is this?" he said. His voice was steady. But Garland, who had been standing at his shoulder, had already picked up the document. Garland's face told the story before his mouth did. The blood left his cheeks in a way that was almost comic. A slow, visible draining, like watching a tide go out. "Richard," Lawson said, "what is this?" Garland didn't answer immediately. He was reading. His eyes moved down the page, then back up, then down again, the way eyes move when they are reading something that contradicts everything they believe to be true. Bridget had returned from the restroom. She stood in the corridor doorway, champagne flute still in her hand, and watched the room with the sharp, instinctive attention of someone who understood that the atmosphere had changed in a way that couldn't be changed back. Patricia Hargrove, on the other side of the table, looked at Agent Voss. "Is this merger proceeding?" she asked. Her voice was calm, professional, the voice of a woman who had seen deals fall apart before and knew exactly what the next 12 hours would look like. Agent Voss looked at her. "No," she said, "it is not." The next 10 minutes were the quietest Lawson Creed had ever experienced. Not because no one was talking. People were talking, Garland on his phone, the Hargrove lawyers in a huddle, the press asking questions that no one answered. The cameras were still rolling. The champagne glasses, untouched, still gleamed on the secondary table like a joke no one had laughed at. But Lawson himself was silent. He stood at the signing table with the injunction in his hands, and he read it. Not quickly, the way he usually read things, scanning for the numbers, the bottom line, the thing that mattered, but slowly, word by word, the way a man reads a sentence that is telling him the ground beneath his feet has disappeared. Agent Voss stood 3 feet away. She did not move. She did not need to. The document in Lawson's hands was doing the work. "This says retroactive damages," Lawson said, finally. His voice was different now, flatter, stripped of the performance, the way a voice sounds when the performance is no longer possible. "It does," Voss said. "For how long?" 3 years. From the date of first documented infringement to the present. Lawson looked at Garland. "Richard, tell me this is wrong." Garland put the phone down. He looked at Lawson with an expression that Lawson had never seen on his face before. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. The look of a man who had just realized that the foundation of the building he was standing in had been hollow for years. It's a standard essential patent, Garland said. His voice was quiet, careful, the way a man talks when he is choosing words that might be the last ones he gets to say before a catastrophe. Patent 4471R. It covers the core routing architecture. The one our drones use. The one our fleet runs on. Legacy Holdings, Lawson said. The words came out slowly, as though he were tasting them. My grandfather's company. Your ex-wife's company, Garland said. You signed it over to her. In the divorce. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens in rooms when something has broken that cannot be repaired. Lawson's hands, still holding the injunction, did not shake. But his grip tightened, the knuckles going white, the tattoos on his fingers stretching with the tension in his skin. Who is the trustee? He asked. On the patent. Who holds it? Garland pointed to a line on the document. It was near the bottom of the second page, in the section labeled Plaintiff Representative and Authorized Signatory. The name was printed in clean, formal style, the way courts print names, without emphasis, without drama, without any of the weight that the name deserved. Mina Creed, sole trustee, Creed Legacy Holdings. Lawson looked at the name for a long time. The cameras caught his face. They caught the exact moment, the precise second, when the smile that had been there all morning finally fell away, and what was left behind was something raw and unguarded and, for the first time in years, completely honest. Agent Voss spoke again. Mr. Creed, the order awards 100% of retroactive profits from the infringed patent to Creed Legacy Holdings. It also transfers operational control of your current fleet to the plaintiff pending full satisfaction of the judgment. She paused. She let the words settle the way dust settles after an explosion. Your fleet, Mr. Creed. All of it. Bridget's champagne glass slipped from her fingers. It didn't shatter, it was plastic, one of the cheaper ones from the secondary table, meant for the celebration that was never going to happen. It hit the marble floor with a hollow sound and rolled twice before it stopped. They took him out through the same side door. Not in handcuffs, this was not that kind of case, not yet, but with two members of Voss's team on either side of him, walking at a pace that was just slightly too fast to be comfortable, the way escorts walk when they want to make it clear that the escort is not optional. Lawson moved through the service corridor without speaking. His suit jacket was still buttoned. His tie was still straight. But something about the way he carried himself had changed. The posture was still upright, still proud, but the pride had lost its engine. It was running on fumes now, on the residual momentum of a man who had spent years believing that force and speed and noise were the only things that mattered in the world. He had been wrong about that. Garland followed at a distance, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in the low, urgent cadence of a man making calls he should have made years ago. The Hargrove delegation had already left. Patricia Hargrove had shaken no one's hand on the way out, had simply gathered her team and walked to the elevator with the brisk, unhurried efficiency of a woman who had just decided to do her due diligence before signing anything. Bridget stayed in the lobby. She stood where she had been standing when the doors opened, near the corridor entrance, still in her red dress, the empty plastic cup at her feet. She watched Lawson disappear into the service corridor without expression. Not grief, not anger, not the kind of theatrical devastation that would have made a good story. Just a stillness. The stillness of a woman recalculating. She left 20 minutes later without speaking to anyone, and did not return Lawson's calls for the rest of the day. The transfer of assets took 6 weeks to process. It moved through the courts quietly, efficiently, with the kind of bureaucratic inevitability that makes large things happen without drama. Lawson's legal team filed motions. They were denied. They filed appeals. They were denied again. The injunction held. The evidence held. The 3 years of documentation that Mina had built, quietly, methodically, one piece at a time, in the silence of a small apartment where no one was watching, held. Gerald Holt called Mina on a Wednesday afternoon to tell her it was done. She was at the public library on Hargrove Avenue, the same one she had spent years in, reading patent law and court precedents at the long wooden tables near the back, where the light came in gray and steady through the high windows. She answered the phone in the hallway, away from the reading room, because the librarians took silence seriously. "It's finalized," Gerald said. "The fleet is yours. The profits are yours. All of it." Mina leaned against the hallway wall. She said nothing for a moment, not because she didn't know what to say, but because the words, for the first time in years, felt unnecessary. The thing she had built was already built. The thing she had waited for had already arrived. There was nothing left to plan, nothing left to calculate, nothing left to do except let it land. "Thank you, Gerald," she said. She hung up. She stood in the hallway for another minute, listening to the quiet sounds of the library. Pages turning, a chair scraping, the distant hum of the ventilation system. Then she walked back to her table, closed the book she had been reading, and sat for a while in the gray light, doing nothing at all. The first day Mina walked into the Creed Logistics headquarters, she did not wear the dusty coat. She wore black, a blazer, tailored and close-fitting, over a simple dark blouse. Her hair was pulled back the way it always was, not out of vanity, but out of practicality, the way a woman wears her hair when she has spent years caring more about clarity than appearance. She carried a leather folder, the same kind Voss had carried into the lobby, and she walked through the front doors, past the reception desk, past the black stone and the polished marble and the letters on the wall that still said Creed Logistics. The woman at the reception desk looked up. She recognized Mina. Not personally, but from the paperwork, from the documents that had crossed her desk in the last 6 weeks, from the name that had appeared on every single one of them. "Mrs. Creed," she said. Mina looked at her. She smiled. Not the wide, performative smile that Lawson wore in photographs, but a small, quiet thing. The kind of smile that belongs to people who have learned that the most powerful thing you can do in a room is not to fill it, but to know exactly how much space you need. "Just Mina," she said. She walked past the desk, past the champagne glasses that someone had finally cleared away, past the signing table that was now bare and ordinary and empty. She walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. The doors opened. She stepped inside. She did not look back. Ego looks at the gold. Wisdom looks at the blueprint. The man who moves the loudest does not always move the farthest. The woman who moves the quietest sometimes moves the world. Lawson Creed still thinks no one is watching. He dismissed Mina. He mocked her. He laughed. Every person who stays silent gives him one more reason to believe he's untouchable. Lawson believed. She was a relic, a receipt he'd already discarded. That's how men like Lawson stay powerful, by making sure stories like Mina's vanish. He's counting on you to scroll past, to forget, to let the receipt stay discarded. Don't disappear, subscribe, prove him wrong.